am now joined by Godfrey Bloom. Now, many of you know Godfrey Bloom. He is a former MEP, an outspoken member of the European Parliament, and wonderfully so. He's now a commentator. He's a YouTuber. We did a year's review together, didn't we, Godfrey? And in fact, Abby Roberts said to me, it made her cry. I said, why? She said there was something really sort of emotional about it that she loved, that really sort of touched her, which was amazing. Godfrey is, yeah, absolutely. Godfrey is the absolute perfect person to come on and analyse all the war talk that we're hearing. He's an associate member of the Royal College of Defence Studies, a Parliamentary Armed Forces medal holder, Territorial Defence medal holder, and written various defence papers and articles. And as I say, with his history, I thought he was absolutely the perfect person to analyse what is going on. And last week, of course, we heard the head of the British Army talking about reintroducing conscription to our country. This was roundly shot down by Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. But since then, we have seen the same call appear all around the world, including in Australian media at the weekend. So, what is this all about? Well, first of all, we would like to play you a short clip from Tony Benn, the former MP, now sadly dead. He spent many years in Parliament ardently fighting against war and was famously once quoted as saying, if we can find the money to kill people, we can find the money to help people. Let's have a little look at what Tony said all those moons ago.
See, I think there are two ways in which people are controlled. First of all, frighten people, and secondly, demoralise them. An educated, healthy and confident nation is harder to govern. And I think there's an element in the thinking of some people. We don't want people to be educated, healthy and confident because they would get out of control.
Why does that clip resonate so strongly with you, Godfrey?
Well, what an extraordinary thing, Sonia, that I would be now in the Tony Benn camp. But I don't think it matters whether you're left or right, which is an anachronism now in my view anyway. It's about freedom and a democracy. And so Tony Benn and I wouldn't have any agreement at all on the running of the economy or probably anything else. But if you're going to have or claim to have an economy, it must be with representative government that we can sack whenever we want to sack and have to broadly reflect the views of the people, the man on the Clapham omnibus. That's not happening now. Now, on this particular subject, Sonia, of conscription and war, and we're hearing the war drums beat now as loudly as we did in 1914. And I'm, of course, a military historian. And I saw from history that suddenly in 1914, we went from everybody not wanting a war, negotiating not to having a war, to having one of the most horrific wars that the world has ever seen, with a lot of millions and millions of young men killed totally needlessly for no reason. And even today we scratch our heads and we say, what was that all about? You know, on Armistice Day, all these poor young men, what was that about? Nobody gets anything from war. Now, I'm not a pacifist. I'm an ex-soldier. I'm not a pacifist. But most wars, not all, are a waste of time, blood and treasure. You know, they don't work. Nobody really actually wins a war at the end of the day. Now, that was Tony Benn speaking. And of course, we have on no analysis from mainstream media at all. The defense correspondent of the BBC is a complete and total numpty. He doesn't know an able seaman from a colour sergeant. He hasn't a clue. I think he got dicked at the Christmas party. And the Times a few years ago had Lucy Fisher, who was a defence correspondent. My God, absolutely hopeless. And of course, the old days, the Daily Telegraph had John Keegan and Claire Hollingworth, who were some of the greatest war correspondents, post-war correspondents ever, and they knew their business. Now, the problem we have today, and we were warned of this by Eisenhower, President Eisenhower, in 1960, in his speech, his departure speech that every president gives. And he said, beware of the military-industrial congressional complex, which will end up dominating our entire economy and our foreign policy. He warned us of this way back in 1960. Now, we've seen this happen. Because when you have $1 trillion budget, annual budget, which the Americans have, you're going to find that money finds itself into Congress and the Senate. and the people are making money. And war is about making money for arms manufacturers and bankers. Make no mistake, this is old as time itself. This is how it works. And this is what we're seeing now. And we have been given, as Eisenhower warned us, we have been given the United States, which is one of the most powerful countries on the planet, a militaristic society, much the same as the Prussians were in the late 1900s. It's a militaristic society. It's about militarism. They have 200 overseas bases. Sorry, wrong. 800 overseas bases.
Good Lord.
And 200,000 overseas personnel. It's a warlike nation, and they have to have war to feed the beast. You can't feed the beast unless you have a bogeyman. So they have to invent bogeymen.
What did you think about the news this week that we are once again going to be storing Americans' nuclear weapons at RAF Lakenheath? Did you see that news?
Yes, and they've been there, of course, for a while. Now, my point is, I'm not anti-American. I've always been an Atlanticist. I was part of NATO for nearly 20 years. I was with 4th Armoured Division on the logistical side when I got older, and light armoured reconnaissance as a young man. So I do know something about this from every angle. And NATO was a defensive treaty, and all the training we did in Europe was defensive, because we knew that the Soviet Union was a politically hostile power and very, very well armed. So everything we trained to do was defensive. Now the Soviet Union has collapsed. This is something, of course, that people can't grasp. The legacy media cannot accept. The Soviet Union has gone, and it went a long time ago. So strategically, and I'm, as you say, I'm an associate member of the Royal College of Defence Studies. I'm trained in strategy. There is not a natural strategic enemy in the Russian Federation. There used to be when it was the Soviet Union, because it was politically hostile. That is no longer the case. And if you look at the Great War, and if you look at the Second War, our main savior ally was Russia. They saved us. We wouldn't have won the war without Russia. And they are a natural strategic ally, if you will, or certainly non-combatant or not aggressive. And of course, they're the biggest landmass on the face of the planet, with more industrial resources and natural resources than anybody else. We've also pushed them into the arms of China by our hostility in the West. They used to see the Soviet Union largely as China as being an enemy. And now we've pushed them into that camp. And with the weaponization of the dollar, we've now seen the BRICS, the involvement of BRICS countries. And so we're now going back into sort of West and East, and the renewal of the Cold War, which of course is what America wants. Raytheon, Grumman, all these big arms manufacturers in America, which are doing extremely well, and the billionaires that have produced on the Hill in Washington, because they're all on the take, make no mistake. So it's about warfare. We've been here before. Now, here's something that people don't understand. The Nick Beals of this world and the Lucy Fishers don't get it. What you've got to understand is all this Tory, warlike Tory, bang the gong. We've got to have all this nonsense that the British Army is now about 60,000 strong. 60,000. What does that mean? 60,000? Oh, sounds quite a lot, doesn't it? That means we could probably put into the field 2 armoured brigades. 2 armoured brigades. All this, let's get tough and let's fight the Russians. 2 armoured brigades. And that's at the most, with the logistical background that a brigade needs. The Russian Federation has 1 million men, which is more brigades than you can count. I tried to look up the number of brigades. I ran out. I got to something like 150 and I ran out. So it's monster. And now, of course, they're combat ready and combat trained. And they have 1 million in reserve. So the concept that Russia, even if we didn't like Russia and we, for some reason, which was legitimate, which we don't have, war with Russia is absurd. It's ludicrous. And of course, we have this NATO, which keeps encroaching. And this is seen as an existential threat from the Russian Federation. And when I was at Sandhurst, I did the Russia Studies course. You have to look at it from their point of view. Now, when the collapse of the Soviet Union came along, we saw NATO expand. We said we wouldn't expand NATO, but we have done. So all through the Baltic, so Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, we've pushed all that up there. Romania in Central Europe, we pushed it up to the Russian border. They see this as an existential threat. And that's not unreasonable, as the Americans did when the missiles, right, Russian missiles came into Cuba. Right. So if it's sauce for the goose, it's sauce for the gander. And this is what we need to do. We need to just get round. What happened to diplomacy? What happened to diplomacy? Nobody talks to each other anymore, do they?
There's no profit. Bang, there's no profit.
Let's have a war.
Yeah, but there is no profit in diplomacy, is there? But, you know, the thing is, I just had to have a cursory glance at headlines around the world, and the war talk seems to be increasing day on day. You have Boris Johnson, former Prime Minister, making a video that tells young British citizens to experience the attractions and advantages of military training or service. Then we have headlines saying Iran has sent a message to the US via a third party that the slightest attack on Iranian soil will be met with retaliatory strikes. So we are hearing it on a constant basis. But do you feel, as indeed do I, but I don't claim to be have the knowledge that you have, not at all. But do you feel there has been a ramping up of the war talk since October the 7th and the Hamas Israel attacks that took place? Do you feel that, or is that just me?
No, you're right. It's a thing, and now we're drawing into Sweden, into NATO, for example. Sweden has been neutral for 200 years. They're now talking about conscription. They've panicked the Swedish people. They're now sort of stocking up on groceries and stuff. There is no threat to Sweden at all from the Russian Federation. Finland has now joined NATO. They've been neutral since 1940. And of course, if you go to St. Petersburg and if you go to Tallinn in Estonia, as I have done, all the Finns go there to drink because the booze is cheap. There is no enmity between those people anymore. You know, we have to move on. History is one thing, and it's a good thing, and I understand history, but we have to learn from history and move forward. Now, this general that's claiming Sanders, I think his name is, or Sanderson, the chief of staff, the chief general. Now, here's something people don't understand. I was on the last exercise which trained as a corps exercise. A corps is 3 divisions, 3, 3, 9, 10 brigades, if you will. I was on the last one. So we now don't have an army with any officers trained in the concept of warfare at corps level or even divisional level. All right. So this general who's talking about it has no experience.
That's extraordinary. That is extraordinary.
And the guy's a complete muppet. I mean, how could you possibly say that as a professional soldier who reached general rank, who has no experience whatsoever of soldiering at that level? And this is the problem that the Russian Federation have. It's integrated warfare. It's artillery systems guided by satellite, ballistic missiles, highly accurate, drones. We don't have drones. That's like going in 1914, as we did, with virtually no weapons, no guns, no artillery, and very few machine guns. We are behind technically. We're behind technically, not only militarily. And who wants to join the army when your promotion is based on your sexual preferences or the color of your skin? It's no longer a meritocracy.
Or the diversity. Vausila says Godfrey Bloom is a good guest. He is indeed. Godfrey, let me ask you this. Do you feel that we are genuinely heading towards a World War III?
That's a very difficult question, because world wars normally come out of sort of a little bit left field and shouldn't have happened. But the way to actually avoid a world war is to stop the triggers. Don't get near the triggers. If you do not have bases and missiles all over the world, you're much less likely to come into conflict. And this is the problem we have. And this is what the Russian Federation will look at, and the Chinese will look at. Now, with Sweden and Finland joining, we will find American missiles on the Russian border in Finland and Sweden, in the Arctic Circle. they will then see that as an existential threat where there wasn't one before. And if you look at a map with all these bases on, you can see that the encirclement of the Russian Federation and China are just the fear that Germany had in 1914 of encirclement. What you need to do is go back to diplomacy. Why are there all these bases? Why on earth does America feel it needs 800 overseas bases? We're threatening people, and then when people feel threatened, you risk war. There's no need for war. There's no need for all this. We need to be friends and trade and stop this regime change. Russia, the Americans have said quite definitively they want regime change in the Russian Federation. All right? It's none of their business. It's none of their business. The Americans need to get their bloody noses out of everybody else's business. There will be a world war if we don't get rid of the neocons in Washington, Lindsey Graham, John Bolton, and all these people. They're nutters. It's like Dr. Strangelove. They're nutcases. And of course, Boris, we don't know what Boris is getting paid by this huge war machine, do we, behind the scenes? And he'll do anything for the money. And of course, it's rather a great big fat pudding talking about young men coming soldiers. Oh, come off it, Boris. You couldn't run around the park without throwing up your big fat
Absolutely. Matt Nettle says, my granddad liberated Belsen, affected him forever. It does. It has a dreadful impact on people. And it's not just the soldiers themselves, but the ripple effect impacts the entire family, as Godfrey will tell you. Now, Godfrey, I understand that you will be coming back in a couple of weeks, speaking to another host on TNT for a longer period of time, which will be fantastic because he will be able to go into more detail with you. But I urge anybody to check out Godfrey's work. Absolutely brilliant. Always prepared to say it as he sees it. Very much appreciate all of my guests today, the input, everything. This has been Wednesday's edition of the Sonia Poulton Show on Today's News Talk. Abby Roberts is coming up next. Thank you, wonderful Godfrey Bloom, for joining me, as indeed Lord Prem Sikka. And thank you all for your wonderful comments. Take good care of yourself, and I'll see you tomorrow.
As most of you know, my work is very heavily independently research-based, and I get my information from all over the world. It would help if you press the subscribe button and the little bell next to it, because the more subscribers I have, the more likely it is that international independent research institutes will share their material with me. It's most helpful, and then of course I automatically share it with you. So, surprise, won't cost you anything. Thank you very much.